You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.
Welcome back to On the Way Home, the podcast where we explore the people, ideas, and innovations shaping housing and belonging across Canada. I'm your host, Emmy Kelly. Today, I'm joined by Jen Crowe, Executive Director of Choices for Youth in Newfoundland and Labrador. Jen leads an organization that supports more than 1,000 young people each year through housing, employment, mental health supports, and systems-level advocacy. Her work focuses not only on responding to crisis, but on addressing the root causes of youth homelessness through equity-driven strategies, family and natural supports, and innovative service integration across both urban and rural communities. Let's jump in. Welcome, Jen. So exciting to have you on the podcast. We're going to start with our signature question on the way home. What does home mean to you?
Yeah, thanks so much, Emmy and team, for having me. It's a joy to be on the podcast. I'm a longtime listener of this fabulous podcast, so it's good to be on this side of the screen. You know, I think when I think about what it means and what home means to me, I think about like where the people I care about are. And I often think about this question in relation to what home doesn't feel like. I lived away for a little bit. And as soon as I left my province and my community, I really felt that what it means to not feel connected to a community, or to feel like you're trying to get your bearings, to feel like you don't know who to go to for help. And certainly home to me really means the opposite. It's knowing who to go to, knowing that you're supported, knowing you're not alone, and having a safe place to call home. I think all of those pieces really feed into what it means to be comfortable and confident in the place that you live.
Amazing. Can you start by sharing with the listeners a bit about your personal journey into this work? I saw an interesting post online in relation to Coldest Night of the Year walk and your journey in as a student, and that kind of full circle moment. But can you tell us a bit more your journey into housing and supporting youth?
Yeah, definitely. So for me, I've always been really interested in systems change. I was like a bit of a political science nerd, and I did my bachelor's in poli-sci and a master's in public administration. And I think I've always been really obsessed with the idea that we make policy decisions that can make people's lives way better. We make policy decisions that can make some people's lives way worse. And when I think about housing and homelessness, I really just think about these as policy decisions. Doesn't mean it's easy to make policy decisions to end homelessness, but it's certainly possible. And we've seen that in other places across Canada and internationally too. So really what led me into this work was I, again, obsessed with kind of those systems level changes and policy decisions. I did my undergraduate here in Newfoundland and Labrador at Memorial University in political science, and really kind of actually did my honors thesis on youth engagement and youth attachment to communities in rural Newfoundland and Labrador. And then I went on to do my master's at Western University, and also was really focused on like, what does it mean to build community? What does it mean to build safe, affordable communities, in particular where young people can stay and thrive? And all I could think about while I was there was, what does this look like in our province? Newfoundland and Labrador historically has had a declining population. We're a teeny tiny province, 550,000 people. It's like the same population as a mid-sized city in Ontario. So, and really geographically dispersed. So I couldn't wait to be able to apply what I had learned back in Newfoundland and Labrador. And my first job out of university was actually working for Memorial University in student leadership development, which was an amazing first job, because I was running fellowship programs and conferences focused on helping youth grow and improve their leadership skills. And it was that experience that really made me feel like, oh my goodness, there's so many systemic barriers that are facing young people in particular that we really need to be addressing. And just to give you one example, we over and over again, I saw young people who were connected to these leadership programs, and oftentimes it was on their own time and it was kind of volunteer, extracurricular. And I also noticed that there was lots of people who were not connecting. And over my couple of years working there, I learned really quickly that many of the youth who were not connecting to those leadership development opportunities were not doing so because they didn't want to. They were doing so because they felt like they couldn't. And the reason that they couldn't is because they were, maybe international students who were working 60 or 80 hours a week just trying to get by. They were young people who were more preoccupied with where they were going to get their next meal and could they make it to the food bank outside of their class time than trying to engage with a leadership development opportunity. And, these were young people who were really precariously housed and really struggling to both afford tuition and afford a rental unit, and often living in really overcrowded living arrangements as well. So I started to really notice these systemic barriers. And ultimately, an opportunity ended up coming up at Choices for Youth at that time was really focused on building out a provincial strategy to address some of what I was seeing within the university, which would address, food insecurity, and youth homelessness and mental health issues amongst youth across Newfoundland and Labrador. And I jumped at that opportunity, and it felt really risky at the time, I'll be honest, because I think if you're working at the university and you make a jump into the nonprofit sector, it feels like, oh my gosh, I had this stability and like a promise of a pension and all these things. And I didn't know much about the nonprofit sector, but I knew that this work would be meaningful, and I knew it would be really aligned with what I wanted to do. And I've never looked back. I've been now with Choices for Youth for 6 years, and I've had the great privilege of starting in a coordinator role and overseeing this provincial initiative, moving into a manager position, and then into a senior director role, and then most recently moving into executive director role about 18 months ago, when my former colleague, friend, and mentor, Sheldon Pollitt, moved on from his role as executive director. So it's been a really interesting journey, but I feel really grateful now in this role to have worked directly with young people and to have really experienced the very real barriers that they experience every single day. And now I feel like in this role, I have the opportunity to try to shape the futures of young people through things like, trying to get investment in programs that really create those types of impact, investing in social enterprises so that youth can earn an income, and making sure that we are advocating for real solutions to the homelessness crisis, including investing in more housing development and affordable housing development. So it's been a really interesting journey so far, and I am continuing to learn so much. I learn from my colleagues and frontline staff every single day, and I look forward to continuing to do that. And who knows what the future holds.
Well, you're clearly very passionate, and I'm wondering if you can explain to us, as executive director of Choices for Youth now, congrats on your appointment to that role. You and your team support more than 1,000 young people each year. Can you paint a picture for us of what the current landscape of youth homelessness looks like across Newfoundland and Labrador?
Absolutely. So again, relatively small province, we historically have not experienced the same levels of homelessness in big urban centers across Canada. But unfortunately, along with many other jurisdictions, that really changed starting in 2020. And just to paint a picture, so in 2020, we had 7.5% vacancy across rental units in St. John's. And today we're teetering around 1%. And during that same time frame of about 5 years, we've also seen an increase in the average rate of rent by about 25%. So what that has meant in terms of homelessness is that it's unfortunately driven homelessness rates up quite a bit over the last 5 to 6 years. And really, just as an example to help illustrate, we have a situation now where landlords can be exceptionally picky when it comes to deciding who they want to rent their units to. And we've had instances over the last several years where we know landlords are being inundated with dozens, if not hundreds, of applications for their rental units. And the people who really get left behind are those who are maybe precariously employed, maybe they're relying on the income support system, maybe they are caregivers and they're currently not employed at all. And we see that really because of that, as one cause, the rates of homelessness are continuing to rise. And so in the last 3 years in St. John's, we've seen homeless rates across all ages triple. And within Choices for Youth, we house about 100 young people a year, and we currently have 115 young people on our housing wait list. So really what we've seen is over the course of that same time period of about 5 years, we've seen our first encampment in St. John's. We have seen a rise in homelessness across rural and remote regions of Newfoundland and Labrador. And with that, we've seen an overall increase in the rise of mental health and complex mental health challenges across the same populations. So it's certainly a situation that we would like to see changed. And I think the good thing is that we do know what would change it. The right investments in the right areas, we know would shift that upward trajectory of homelessness and youth homelessness in particular. But it's not a problem that we see going away anytime soon. And without that kind of systems level investment across multiple organizations and in partnership with multiple levels of government, I don't think we can expect to see that trajectory change much. And I'm really curious to see kind of what an injection in terms of affordable housing, what that does to that upward trend. But it is certainly, no matter what age population you're looking at, the rates of homelessness have considerably and measurably increased over the last 5 years in Newfoundland and Labrador.
So when people think about homelessness, they often picture adults in urban centers, like you said. What are some of the unique realities facing youth, especially in rural and remote communities, like where you serve?
Definitely. And I think it's really important for folks to understand that when it comes to how we understand the issue of youth homelessness and how we end youth homelessness, it does often look a little bit different than it does for adult populations. So the number one cause of youth homelessness is family breakdown. And that is really interesting when you look at that from a rural lens. So one example that I'll share that we see every single week at Choices for Youth is a young person's living in a rural region of the province. They get kicked out of their house or they choose to leave home for whatever reason. We hear a lot of stories of young people who maybe come out as queer or trans to their parents and they get kicked out of the house. And so they end up maybe by themselves getting on a bus and heading into St. John's, or they get put on a bus and sent into St. John's. But ultimately they arrive at our doorstep. They have their belongings on their back and they're looking for everything that anyone would need: housing and supports and a place to work. And this is a really concerning trajectory. And I think it really speaks to the need and how we focus our interventions, which is, first of all, on helping youth where possible, where healthy, connect with family and what we call natural support. So people in their life who are safe for them. That could be a family member, an extended family member. It could be a friend of the family. It could be the mom of their friend. It could be just somebody in their life who is looking out for them and interested in their well-being. And I think in terms of how we end youth homelessness, whether it's in an urban region or a rural region, it has to start there. It has to start by helping youth make their way back to at least my definition of home, which is being close to your family and people that care about you and who you care about. I think the other side of that is, unfortunately, we have seen an increase in the number of young people over the last several years who are migrating into St. John's from other parts of Newfoundland and Labrador to access those types of services. And so we also need to provide some kind of supports when they get here. And in our experience, what we're seeing, especially for those rural youth, is we really need to focus on three core things. Number one is really that housing first approach. So we can't start talking about therapy or how we're going to help you get a job or getting you engaged with education or employment in general until you have some kind of stable housing. So that's the first thing that we do is we own and operate many units of housing in the St. John's region. So we try to get youth connected with one of those housing options or connected with some other housing and community. That's number one. And the second thing that we'll do is we'll try to provide some kind of mental health services or primary care supports, whatever that young person needs. And the third thing is really helping them transition to employment and education. And again, that is if we can't create pathways back to family, which is always our priority. But what our experience has been is that when we can provide some combination of basic needs, primary care, mental health services, employment education paired with housing, that's where we really see a measurable improvement in housing stability. And I'll just share one statistic is of the youth who we worked with last year, we were able to, of the youth who we worked with last year who are homeless, we were able to provide stable housing to 81% of those young people. And again, the picture that I like to paint is that it's not just about, well, let's get them into an apartment and like best of luck to you. It's about, let me help you create the conditions for stability in your life. And housing is maybe a third of that equation. It's a really critical component, but it's not the whole picture. And I think when we can layer on appropriate mental health services, primary care, and also pathways to earn an income, that's where we really see youth stabilize and get better and really change the trajectory of their lives. But for me, it always has to come back to how can we help them make a connection back to their community, whatever that looks like for them. And when I reflect on what it means to be well for me, I wouldn't be well without that connection to my people and to family, to community, to friends. And youth are no different. And I think we really need to make sure that we are centering their needs, and their needs are beyond physical infrastructure. They also extend to what it means to be well. And that family and natural supports approach is both, unfortunately, the primary cause of youth homelessness. But I think the other way to look at that is it's the primary solution to ending youth homelessness too.
And going back a bit to, the systems and policy work you started with, clearly you had a lot of passion around that. So you've spoken about addressing root causes of homelessness rather than just responding to the crisis. What does a systems-focused, equity-driven approach look like in practice at Choices for Youth?
Definitely. I think the short answer is that it looks different for every individual young person. But I think what we have seen certainly over the years is that when we really break down the demographics of who we support, it's about a third of the youth who we support have recently arrived in St. John's from other parts of Newfoundland and Labrador. We have about a third of the youth who we support identify as a member of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. And certainly we see many Indigenous young people who walk through our doors and newcomer youth who walk through our doors as well. So recognizing the intersectional dimension of youth homelessness is really critical, and starting there. So one of the things that I've seen to be so effective over the last several years is actually working in partnership with other organizations, and certainly making sure that the idea is if a young person walks through our doors, they don't know and they don't care who is paying the primary care provider's salary versus the youth outreach worker's salary versus the addictions counselor's salary. And I think when we think about an equity-driven and a holistic approach to ending and addressing youth homelessness, we really need to think about everything that a young person needs. And one of the most, I think, effective things that we've invested in over the years is that centralized and coordinated access point for young people. So if a young person walks through our door of our Integrated Youth Services hub in downtown St. John's, they can come in for a meal 5 days a week, and they can certainly have a conversation with a support worker. And if that support worker says, you know what, it sounds like you've really been struggling. It sounds like, maybe you're navigating depression or anxiety, and there's lots going on in your life that would lead to that. But do you want to get some help today? And if they say yes, that support worker can literally guide them 5 steps to the right to see a primary care provider, or a few steps down the hall to see a therapist. Or maybe they're navigating addictions issues, and today they feel, today I really want to see what could it mean to look at a pathway towards recovery. And okay, well, let me get you in to see the addictions counselor today, right now. instead of sending young people across town, we're sending young people across a hall. And that in and of itself is part of what is addressing youth homelessness in our community. And certainly when we think about the intersectionality of this, we know that many, if not most, of the youth who we work with don't have access to transportation. They may have all kinds of other responsibilities in their life, i.e., the primary care provider in their family. They may have children that doesn't allow them to go across the community and wait in a doctor's office for a half hour. They have real pressures on their time and pressures on their resources that many of us would simply not experiencing. And so by availing them, making sure that they can avail, that centralized access point for the delivery of many services is really what's allowing us to help speed up that process of them achieving stability and achieving their goals. And I think we really need to continuously think about that. And again, I emphasize that that's not Choices for Youth delivering all those services. It's us saying, okay, to our primary care providers in the community, you're probably spending a third of your time with young people. Could you spend a third of your time with us at Choices for Youth? And to mental health practitioners in our community and addictions counselors, many of your clients may actually be those who are accessing services at Choices. Can you spend some of your time with us? And over many years of those relationship building, we've been able to foster this centralized access point for youth supports. And ultimately, that's what's leading to some of the outcomes that we can achieve, which is, we see amongst one of our programs, our program for young moms, we see an 88% reduction in emergency room visits. And that's not by coincidence, and it's also not rocket science. It's that when we can provide housing mixed with opportunities for employment, mixed with access to primary care that's easy and comfortable, then those young moms, their lives can turn around, and the lives of their children can turn around as well. So we need to do that by recognizing that everyone has individualized needs, and that everyone can avail of having easier access to services and supports, which is really what we strive to achieve at Choices for Youth.
I'm wondering if we can go back for a minute to what you were saying about the Choices for Youth model of family and natural supports, and maybe just take us there for a few minutes for any of our listeners to know what that model or approach is, and how can strengthening help prevent or end homelessness?
Absolutely. So the family and natural supports model is one that has really taken off across Canada and internationally as an evidence-based approach to addressing and ending youth homelessness. And basically what it means is that instead of the automatic reaction to a young person being homeless being, oh my goodness, let me find you a shelter bed tonight. Oh my goodness, let me get you into a supportive or transitional housing unit. It's more about tell me about what's going on in your life today. Tell me who are the people who you can rely on. That doesn't necessarily need to be mom or dad, but it could be there's an extended family member, there's an aunt or an uncle who you really trust, there's a grandparent in your life who would answer the phone if you called. You have a really close friend and their mom has been rooting for you and making sure that you have dinner a couple nights a week. Those are the people who in a pinch, they want to help you and they want to see you succeed. And what I love about the family and natural supports approach is that really what we want to do is work ourselves out of a job. We want young people to have better situations and better futures. And part of that comes with systems change. And part of that comes with helping them connect and reconnect with their communities. So that's what the FNS approach really enables. And I just want to give one example of what this looks like in practice. So we offer a program called Upstream, which is an international best practice model emanating out of Geelong, Australia. And we offer it within the school systems. And basically what Upstream is a bunch of young people in a given grade fill out a student needs assessment administered by York University. And through that process, we're able to determine those youth who are most at risk of early school leaving or youth homelessness. And what's beautiful about this model is that we first, of course, work with the youth and we help them with accessing mental health services, it could be tutoring supports or other interventions that help them succeed in school. It could be something as simple as making sure that they have, what they need to be able to join the volleyball team, that they have access to sports equipment, that we can buy you your knee pads. It's breaking down some of those barriers so that if there's something about school that makes you want to come to school that's not actually sitting in a classroom, we really want to encourage and foster that. And that's often, we've seen it so many times with the Upstream program where the youth is showing up because they have volleyball practice at lunch, not because they, want to be there for the kind of curriculum, but they're sticking around through the curriculum for the volleyball practice. And if that's what's going to help you graduate high school on time, like absolutely, we want to enable that. But one of the most powerful interventions that we make through the Upstream model is actually in supporting the families. So we work just as much with that young person's family. And as I'm sure you could appreciate, in many instances, it's, that young person is struggling with their mental health. Maybe they're using substances, they're barely showing up for school. And when you dig a little deeper, it's because things are really falling apart at home. Mom lost their job several months ago. The parents don't know, or the mom doesn't know if she's going to be able to pay rent this month. The kid is stressed out. There's not enough food at home. And instead of it being around, okay, you're only going to get so far by helping that young person. But if you can help mom dust off her resume, do some interview skills, do some job prep, connect her with an opportunity in the community, help her access some mental health services, help her access some income support, then all of a sudden the family unit is improving, and then that kid's life is improving too. And that's a really good example of just what that family and natural supports model can look like in practice, because it's not, instead of just focusing on, okay, I see, there's this young person who's struggling. Okay, well, let's focus there, but also let's focus on why are they struggling? What else is happening in their lives? And how do we strengthen their whole family dynamic so that that young person can continue to thrive? And, really when it comes to preventing youth homelessness, that's a perfect opportunity for us to help ensure that that youth doesn't become homeless when they're 16 or 17 because mom's living arrangement has been falling apart for years. Instead, it allows that young person and family to stay together, perhaps for many more years to come. So that is, again, like the best way to end youth homelessness is to prevent it from happening in the first place. And that is just one example of how we can do that. But really, in terms of youth homelessness prevention, we can't do that without focusing on the entire family. And I think certainly the way that we think about this is we would love a future where we don't need to have emergency shelters because youth are safely and affordably housed either with family or independently in community. And we really see when we can invest in more of those long-term outcomes for young people and those longer-term interventions, that's where we really see that success for those youth and also for those families. And we really want success for both. Like ending child and youth poverty and homelessness is really addressing family poverty and homelessness too.
And Choices for Youth is in affordable housing as well, correct? So that's a major challenge across Canada. Can you explain what a portfolio-based approach to increasing affordable housing stock means and how that strategy is being applied in Newfoundland and Labrador?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think as we all know, there's been a really interesting national conversation happening around what it means to invest in the development of affordable housing. And certainly we've seen through Build Canada Homes, there's been a call for nonprofit and community housing providers to really focus on a portfolio approach. And it's really interesting thinking about this as kind of a smaller region in Canada, because when we look at kind of our homeless population, while it has been an increasing problem, we have about 500 individuals who are homeless in St. John's today. So when we compare that to other bigger urban centers across Canada, that's quite small. But in terms of what it means for a province like ours, it's quite considerable. So when we think about how we build enough affordable housing to be able to meet those people's needs, really for Choices for Youth, we're not going to go out and build 500 units. And I think I can speak for many organizations in our province and in our city who are not looking at that scale of housing development. But I think one of the things that we're really good at in this province is partnership and working together. And I referenced that in some of my earlier answers, but I think what that can look like when it comes to the development of affordable housing is multiple organizations working together to say, okay, you know what, maybe we're looking at building 30 units and maybe another organization's looking at building 50. And then there's a third who's a bigger housing provider. They want to do 100. And if we can bring a few organizations together, well, we might have a 500 or 600 or 700 unit ask to an entity like Build Canada Homes. And that's exactly what we're doing right now. We're really thrilled to be working with Raising the Roof and several other organizations like Connections for Seniors to really try to foster a portfolio-based approach that is reflective of not only what it means to live in a smaller province, but also what it means to be able to house folks in both urban and rural regions. And I think for us, what we would love to see in both our service delivery model and in the investment in affordable housing is that we actually see less people coming into our urban centers. Because overwhelmingly, when we talk to those folks, they say, again, like, I don't want to come into St. John's. I feel like I have to come into St. John's. And when you ask them why, they talk about the lack of affordable housing. They talk a lot about the lack of mental health services. They talk about the lack of employment opportunities. And I really feel like we can reverse that trend. And when it comes to supporting youth, it's healthier if we can reverse that trend and keep them closer to their communities. So a portfolio-based approach for us is really doing exactly that, is working across Newfoundland and Labrador, rural, urban, and northern coming together, along with a portfolio of partners and with housing units that are shovel ready or close to it, and going forward to entities like Build Canada Homes and also our provincial government, and looking at how we can work together to measurably reduce homelessness across Newfoundland and Labrador, or end homelessness across Newfoundland and Labrador. And that's, I think, when I think about a portfolio-based approach, especially in a small province like ours, that's what I really think is possible. Is if we're talking about 500 individuals in St. John's and maybe there's a few more hundred across Newfoundland and Labrador, that's possible. We could build enough housing units and with the right level of wraparound supports and prevention-based services. This is certainly something that we could end in Newfoundland and Labrador. And I think it's exciting and really interesting to see programs like the Upstream program matched with interventions like really investing in affordable housing. Those two things together, I think we could really see that measurable reduction in the rates of homelessness and maybe even an end to homelessness in our province. So we're really excited to be working with a bunch of partners to put forward a portfolio-based approach that's tailored to a rural and an urban context in Newfoundland and Labrador. And certainly we hope that we can be successful in gaining some investment from both the federal and provincial governments to be able to see this through, because I think we have a really good understanding of what the impact would be on those who are most precariously housed in our communities if we can see that investment come to fruition.
Choices for Youth is leading the development of Becket Integrated Youth Services in partnership with more than 65 community organizations. What inspired this initiative, and how will it transform the way youth access mental health and social services?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting initiative, and we can't take any of the credit for it. It's been an international best practice model emanating out of multiple countries, including Ireland. And we have learned a lot from other international partners, and we've learned a lot from other jurisdictions across Canada who've done this way before us. So Foundry in British Columbia, Youth Wellness Hubs in Ontario, and others. But ultimately, where this started was about 10 years ago. We started to notice a really alarming trend where more and more young people were coming to Choices for Youth in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, from other parts of Newfoundland and Labrador. And we received some federal investment to really dig into what was going on here and why are these youth kind of coming in droves to St. John's. And we started this provincial research, which ended up with us engaging over 1,000 young people and 300 plus service providers in 32 communities across our province. And really, we learned two things. First thing we learned that's probably most important is that youth don't want to come to St. John's. I think sometimes when we live in urban centers, we think that like we're, the center of the universe and everyone wants to come because there's more things to do and, the mall's better. But that's simply not the case for most of the youth who we talked to. They said, I would like to stay closer to home. I feel like I can't stay closer to home. And I think the second thing that we really learned is that the number one reason that youth were leaving is just because they didn't have access to what they needed in their home communities. In fact, it's so interesting. We did one consultation that I was a part of that just really stands out to me in a rural community in our province. And we were talking to a bunch of high school students and they were so excited. They were getting ready to graduate. We were engaging with them in the spring of the year. They were just about to graduate high school. And we asked this room full of like really eager high school students, how many of you are planning on staying in your home community when you graduate? And only 20% of them said that they were planning on staying in their home community. And when we asked how many of them would stay if they felt like they had their needs met in their home community, 80% of them said that they would stay if they felt like they had their needs met in their home community. And when you really dig into like what are those needs, it's really basic things. Like they want access to affordable, independent living place, their own place that they can call home. They want access to education. They want access to employment opportunities. They want access to mental health services. And they're really open about talking about their mental health and that's something that's important to them. And access to really, a way to make a living and a way to be well that's within their community. And so much of how Becket Integrated Youth Services has developed is really with that spirit in mind, is recognizing that we don't want to see a third of the youth who we help house every year just arriving in the city from other parts of Newfoundland and Labrador. And we don't want to see an increase in the mental health crisis because youth are being displaced and having to move into urban centers to get their needs met. But what we do want to see is young people be well across our province, no matter where they live. And the Integrated Youth Services model, Becket is what we're calling it in our province, is really targeted at improving youth well-being. And we do that really rooted in the same way we address youth homelessness, which is by focusing on both housing and also mental health services, primary care, education, employment, basic needs, and family-based supports. So we're now so excited to be working with these partners across our province to be opening our first Becket Hub site location outside of St. John's in Cornerbrook, which is on the western part of our province. We'll be opening that in about 3 weeks' time, which is super exciting. And then our goal is to be able to operate 5 of these hub sites across Newfoundland and Labrador, and they'll work as a network. And again, with the goal of helping youth stay closer to home as both a way to improve their well-being. And certainly we've had the great privilege of seeing this work in so many other jurisdictions. We've had the great privilege of seeing it work really well in St. John's, and we have no doubt that it will work very well in other parts of Newfoundland and Labrador. And I should say that this whole model has been co-led with young people. So we have a youth advisory council who has helped shape everything from the program delivery model to the name itself. So Becket is the Beothuk word, and the Beothuk people are an Indigenous population in Newfoundland and Labrador that were wiped out. They no longer exist in our province, but it's the Beothuk word for where you go, which is really how the young people who we engaged see the opportunity and have the hope for this model, is that it is the place you go to help you be well. So we're really excited to see this come to fruition across our province.
That's incredible. And would you add if there's elements of it that specifically target or support addressing hidden homelessness or homelessness in the more rural areas?
Definitely, yeah. So I mean, I think when we think about the experience of homelessness, no matter the age population in rural parts of Newfoundland and Labrador, we hear so much Well, we hear two things. We hear that it looks a lot different and that it's often folks who are couch surfing. They may not be sleeping on the street or sleeping in a tent, but they're really precariously housed and they don't know where they're going to stay tonight or tomorrow night. And the second thing that we hear a lot is that it doesn't exist. And that latter point, I think we know from the research to be not true. But I think by virtue of it being hidden, it feels like it doesn't exist in the same way that we think of homelessness in urban centers as being really visible and really public in some cases. So in terms of how this model will help address it, there's a couple ways. I think number one, as we talked about, is prevention and helping youth gain access to what they need so that homelessness isn't a reality that they need to experience. And the second thing is helping make sure that there is adequate housing supports in their community. So in some cases, that may be that we actually build housing as part of the Becket Integrated Youth Services Hub, which is what we've done in St. John's. In other cases, it may be investing in housing stability workers or housing finders to help youth make supportive connections to landlords and help house them that way. The idea of Becket is that it's not a standardized model in the sense that it's plug and play in a bunch of different jurisdictions. We have 5 core elements of the model that need to be achieved in every region across Newfoundland and Labrador. But in terms of how that's achieved, we really want to lean into the expertise of those local leaders and local agencies to be able to fulfill that. But I think certainly a focus on prevention and then the focus on quickly accessing affordable and or supportive housing. Those would be the two things that we'll really be honing in on as core tenets of the model and how we hope to be able to reduce homelessness in regions outside of St. John's.
And you also serve on the board of directors for the Canadian Housing Renewal Association. From your national perspective, what policy or system changes are most urgently needed to truly end youth homelessness in Canada?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, there's so much conversation right now around housing, which I think that gives us a lot of hope that this is something that's on the policy agenda municipally, provincially, and federally in pretty much every jurisdiction across Canada right now. I think it's the how is really important. And one of the things that I often worry about is that we think about addressing homelessness and ending homelessness as something that just requires a lot of investment in capital expenditures, in new builds, in affordable housing. And that is a huge part of the equation. But one of the things that I advocate for nationally and provincially is making sure that we also have embedded mental health and other supports within those housing models. So I would say a lot of the young people who we work with, when we think about like those who are most precariously housed, those that experience homelessness most regularly, oftentimes those folks have additional needs. And that could be just needing access to therapy or needing access to addictions treatment or something else that's going on in their life, needing supportive employment or access to employment. And my hope is that we are focusing just as much on the development of affordable housing as we are on how we support people once we get them housed. And I think one without the other will not meaningfully address homelessness. I really feel that we need both. And that's certainly, I think, a role that the federal government can play in tandem with the provinces to be able to say how many transitional housing and supportive housing units are required in your jurisdiction, and how do we work together to make sure, at the federal level, we're providing the capital investment, and at the provincial level, we're providing the kind of supports investment. And that's what I really hope we can continue to see, because otherwise, I think we miss the mark on supporting the most vulnerable in our community. And again, as I mentioned, we're always looking for how do we work ourselves out of a job. And I think part of that is making sure that we're really addressing these investments really address the needs of the most vulnerable in our community. And We often say that if the most important thing to a decision maker is dollars and cents, this is the most cost-effective way to invest in vulnerable populations, is making sure that they have what they need to create a good life, and that they have housing stability, that they have access to health. And, we've been able to demonstrate through our work that for every dollar invested in Choices for Youth Services, we're able to generate $8.93 in systems cost savings. And that's because we see a measurable reduction in emergency room visits, in justice system involvement, in emergency housing utilization, in engagements with the child welfare system. So this is the type of investment that really makes sense, but it needs to be a capital investment, and it also needs to be an investment in all the supports that really vulnerable populations need in order to be well. And frankly, that any of us need to be well, because most of us at this point have accessed some kind of support in the community. And those young people who we work with who are struggling are no different than us, in the sense that they need help. They need help in order to be able to fulfill their goals too. And so I just hope that we can continue to make sure that we're investing in both of those things at once.
And one thing that we didn't get to chat about are your social enterprises. 5 years ago, Choices for Youth helped provide mentorship to Blue Door for our launch of Construct. Is that still going on? And then I saw the launch of your bakery as well. Tell us a little bit about those opportunities before we wrap up the show. Be great to hear where
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. So this is, I think, such an important part of our model, is if we can get a young person housed, if we can get them some mental health services, some mental health supports, maybe some reconnection to family. The third thing that we really need to make sure is that they have a way to earn an income. And this is exactly what our social enterprise training and employment model does. So we today offer 3 different social enterprises. One that's our most delicious social enterprise, called Crust Craft Bakery and Pizzeria. We also run a thrift store called Neighborhood, and we also run a textiles and design and woodworking social enterprise called The Shop. And together, those social enterprises employ dozens of young people every single year. And I just want to give one example of the impact of this model. So we had a young person who came through our one of our construction-based programs you referenced a couple of years ago, and they were raised by a single mom. They had intergenerational poverty and homelessness was their experience growing up. So they ended up getting the confidence. There was someone in their life that encouraged them to reach out to Choices for Youth. They came through our doors, they did our training, and they did our employment program. They gained skills in property maintenance, in construction. They ended up getting some support through us to connect with college. They went on to do some education around carpentry. Then they got their Red Seal certification in carpentry, and they ended up coming back and teaching the young people who we train and employ as an apprentice. And, we often joke that this person's now off making more money than I'll ever make. And that's exactly the point. That's exactly what we want. And, we've heard stories like this over the years where, these are youth who they're the first in 3 generations to ever disconnect from the income support system. And we can measure that in dollars and cents in terms of system cost savings. We can measure that in terms of outcomes, housing stability, long-term employment. But I think one of the most powerful measurements is how that increases and improves these young people's confidence in themselves. And to be able to prove to yourself that I had a really hard go of it as a kid or as a young person, and I did this thing and it was really hard, but it helped me change the course of my life. And now here I am, and what else can I do? What else can I take on? And that is, I think, one of the most rewarding parts of this job, is seeing those stories, whether that is a young person in our social enterprises, or it's a young mom who has the housing and the stability she needs now to be able to care for her kids, or it's someone who was living in the emergency shelter system and they've, recently got accepted to college. Like, those success stories, we see them every single day, and it's one by one, but also en masse with, 1,200 young people and children every year. that we can really see the impact of the types of investments that we make in housing and mental health services and employment. And certainly that all kind of converges when we think about our social enterprises. And we are also pleased to see, while employment is the main outcome of those social enterprises, long-term labor market attachment, we also see that through about 6 months of engagement in our programs with our social enterprises, we see about a third of the youth actually move on and pursue post-secondary education. So that's really excellent too. And we really try to foster and encourage youth to identify their interests and to be able to pursue their interests. And many of the times we can help them try on a job for size within one of our social enterprises. And, there's many more stories like what I shared, thousands, tens of thousands of these that we've been able to generate over the last several years. And ultimately, it just is a privilege to be a small part of these young people's journeys and to see them succeed. And I think we really operate as an organization out of the idea that every youth has potential, and we choose to see the potential in every young person, no matter their background, no matter what they're experiencing today. We will work with them to help them create a better future. And I think what we see every day is that every young person wants a better future for themselves. So if we can foster and support that, then certainly we see lives change and the trajectory of people's lives change every day. And that's a really lucky thing to be able to be a part of. And I'm really grateful that I've been able to create a career to help build that and to help foster that.
Jen, you're clearly incredibly passionate about what you do and connect the dots very well to actually helping to break cycles of homelessness and poverty. So just so grateful for your leadership. Thank you so much for joining today. The work that you're leading is so important. And I will go ahead and ask if listeners are interested to learn more about your programs or perhaps pick your genius brain over there. Is there any way that you would, entertain conversations, or where can people go to or look?
Yeah, absolutely. So folks can certainly check out our website, choicesforyouth.ca, and you can find my email and information on that website too. I'm always happy for conversations like these, and thank you so much, Emmy, for creating the space for these types of conversations right across Canada and beyond. I really appreciate being a part of it.
We're so grateful for your time and leadership, Jen. Thanks so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay. Today's episode featured Jen Crowe, Executive Director of Choices for Youth, whose leadership highlights the importance of prevention, family and natural supports, and integrated services in addressing youth homelessness. Her work across Newfoundland and Labrador demonstrates how rural communities, realities, collaboration, and innovative housing strategies must be part of the national conversation. Thank you for listening to On the Way Home, a podcast brought to you by Blue Door. Stay tuned for more conversations with leaders working to build stronger pathways to home for people across Canada.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.